Hello, beautiful people, and welcome back. So in this video, we are going to finish up chapter 3. In the first video, we talked about self-concept, identity, self-esteem, face theory, and your perceived and presenting self. In this section, we're going to talk more about the self-fulfilling prophecy, impression management, self-disclosure, and of course, the social penetration theory. So let's jump into the self-fulfilling prophecy. The self-fulfilling prophecy is the idea that if you believe something is going to happen, it's going to happen, or it's more likely that it's going to happen because you think it's going to happen. So again, the self-fulfilling prophecy, it's the idea that if you believe something's going to happen, more than likely it's going to happen. For example, if you believe I'm going to fail this exam, I'm going to do horrible on this exam, I'm not going to do well on this exam, more than likely, guess what? You're probably not going to do well on the exam. Also, if you have the idea, hey, or the expectation, hey, I'm not going to do well on this presentation, I'm probably going to trip when I go up to give this presentation, more than likely, that will happen. Now, I know in the PowerPoint, it talks about the circular stages of the self-fulfilling prophecy, but I don't really want to focus too much on that. And I'm honestly not going to test you on it. Instead, I really want you to focus more so on the two types of the self-fulfilling prophecy. So the first type is the self-imposed prophecy. The second type is the other imposed prophecy. The self-imposed prophecy is an expectation that you have of yourself. Like the example I provided, oh, I'm going to fail this exam. That's an expectation that you put on yourself. Now, with the other imposed prophecy, we are looking at how other people's expectations play a role in how we perform. For instance, remember the example I gave in the first video where my mom always told me that I was smart and that I was hardworking and I was a wonderful individual? She has always carried this expectation of me, if you will, that I would be a hardworking, independent person when I grew up. So, because of these expectations, which are not necessarily a bad thing, I started to behave in accordance with those expectations. I tried my best to work hard in school, I pursued a higher education, I wanted to make her proud, but also I was falling in line with her expectation of me. See, for me, this was a good thing. It was, in a sense, encouraging for me. But some people might grow up having parents, family members, friends, or even teachers attribute negative expectations. For instance, you're never going to go to college, or you're going to get pregnant before you get out of high school. These are real examples that I've heard when talking about this. Now, as you all can probably tell, these people did not fall in line with these other people's expectations of them. For some, it motivated them to go against that negative expectation. For others, however, this could gravely impact their self-worth and possibly cause this expectation to come to pass because this is what they've been told. So then they too might believe it to be true and start behaving in accordance with that expectation. So next, we have impression management. Now, these are the communication strategies people use to influence how others view them. This concept, again, ties closely to face theory. Now, with impression management, we're constructing these multiple identities, such as a teacher, student, brother, and so on. But now we are looking at how others also play a role. How we go about managing our impressions involves others, meaning that it is collaborative. We can figure out how to act in accordance with others based off of how they respond to us and our interactions with them. Now, a lot of the time it can be unconscious. You may notice yourself changing yourself in different contexts or environment, or you may not notice yourself changing yourself in different contexts or environments. It might be something that just comes a little bit more natural. However, sometimes it is a little bit more deliberative. For instance, if you had a job interview, you might present yourself both verbally and non-verbally in a more professional way, and you acknowledge that this is not your day-to-day self. When we read about face theory and impression management, we might think to ourselves, oh wow, people are so fake or so manipulative, but are we really? Are we intentionally trying to be deceptive? Probably not all the time? Or are we just acting in accordance with societal norms or expectations based on the relationship and comfort you have with an individual? That's something I'd really like for you to think about. Is managing all of these different identities being fake, or is it just kind of something that we do intentionally and unintentionally? What is it? So next, let's shine a little bit of light on self-disclosure. Your entire self-disclosure, your previous discussion board post was all related to self-disclosure. So self-disclosure, it's the deliberative act of revealing information about yourself. This is typically not information that people know about you. It requires a level of honesty and being genuine. Now, not all the information we self-disclose is extremely deep and extremely personal. I could disclose that I hate cake, right? But that's very surface level information. That's probably something I could tell my brother, my sister, my aunt, all of you, right? It's not very personal in nature. Am I disclosing something about myself? Yes, but is it very personal? No, not so much. So self-disclosure has different depths or layers, if you will. Typically with self-disclosure, it's not information that you could really just get from anywhere. It's not easily accessible. Now, of course, we have different contexts of sharing. Like we were just talking about, we have different identities. With one friend, you might feel more comfortable disclosing intimate details about your relationship with your partner, for instance, whereas with another friend, maybe you share hobbies and self-disclose less with them. It really is dependent on your comfort level with the other person. So moving on, let's talk a little bit more about the benefits of self-disclosure. So getting stuff off your chest can feel really, really good at times. And this is what we refer to as catharsis or relief. You feel good about sharing information. Second, self-clarification. When you're able to express your views or feelings out loud, it can give you kind of a sense of clarity in your beliefs or how you'd like to go about handling difficult situations. Third, we have self-validation. It's nice to have friends or family members agree with you. For instance, if you decide to break up with your partner, you might get a sense of validation when a friend tells you, wow, you really made the right decision. Like, keep moving on, but you did good for yourself. Keep going on. So next, reciprocity. This deals a little bit more with the even amount of self-disclosure we exchange with that other person. Usually, when building friendships or intimate relationships, the more we start to self-disclose, the more the other person also self-discloses. So it's not like a one-way street. It kind of goes back and forth. Fifth, impression formation. Giving people a little more insight into our thoughts and our feelings can be very intimate in nature, and according to research, you can actually become more attractive when you self-disclose. Interesting, right? Sixth, self-disclosing can help your relationship. If you don't feel comfortable going somewhere or doing something, disclosing these feelings may make your partner or friend more aware and be more considerate of you. If you don't express dissatisfaction for something, more than likely they won't know, which could cause additional conflict. Last but certainly not least, self-disclosure, it can also be a moral obligation. When in a sexual relationship, for instance, it would be important to self-disclose any transmittable diseases. Okay, so now I know self-disclosure sounds like this beautiful, wonderful thing. It kind of has its drawbacks or its risks. First, rejection, right? Just because we self-disclose and we feel comfortable self-disclosing, it doesn't necessarily mean that other people want to hear us self-disclose or that they even care. Second, while it can form positive impressions, it can also form negative impressions as well. For instance, you may self-disclose how many sexual partners you've previously had with a current partner, and they may formulate a negative impression of you simply because they are not in agreement with your sexual experience. Fourth, if you constantly self-disclose, it can lose its influence over time with certain people. Some people might see self-disclosure as something that's very intimate in nature and that it should only be done minimally so that when it does occur, it's more impactful. Others might feel a little bit more comfortable self-disclosing. For this, it's really dependent on the person and their perception and comfortability with self-disclosure. Fifth, a major risk of self-disclosure is a loss of control. Once information is out there, you honestly don't know what the other person's going to do with it. You might tell someone to keep something a secret, but when you self-disclose, you, in a sense, are losing some control of that bit of information. Finally, when we self-disclose, we may end up hurting other people's feelings. For instance, if an ex-partner asks why you broke up with them, telling the intimate details of your disgust for their daily habits or their lack of goals, it might end up, hurting their feelings. Now, when it comes to self-disclosure, you probably don't just meet someone and disclose all of your most intimate goals and information about yourself. It probably builds over time. If any of you have seen the movie Shrek refers to ogres as onions. He claims that they have different layers. Similarly, the social penetration theory proposes that we move from very shallow levels of conversation to more intimate ones over time, right? Typically, we don't meet someone and just tell them our entire life story. Some people do that, right? But typically, in close relationships, it builds over time. And self-disclosure is what we use to go from one layer to the next. Now, the social penetration theory has 5 stages. The first stage is the orientation stage, which is small talk. It's not very intimate in nature. The second stage is the exploratory affirmative stage, and this is when we start revealing more information about ourselves. The third stage is the affective stage. This is more personal in nature. We use informal language and show a commitment to each other. Fourth, we have the stable stage, which are our deepest, most personal thoughts and feelings. Most people do not reach the stage or this layer, if you will. People don't get there, right? Most people do not see the core individual that you are as a human being. Most people do not get there, right? They usually reach the surface level information, and that's about it. Lastly, we have deep penetration. Now, this is if your relationship is experiencing any type of turbulence. You start to withdraw from the other person and sharing intimate information with them, which typically leads to terminating the relationship overall. Now, referring back to the onion analogy, we have this idea of breadth and depth. So depth is each layer of the onion, which falls in line with the 4 steps we just discussed. The breadth is the range of topics, feelings, and opinions. So now that we've discussed the social penetration theory, self-disclosure, impression management, and the self-fulfilling prophecy, we have completed chapter 3. Finally, I know it's a long one, okay? Believe me, I know this is a lot of information in itself, but now this is the time to start thinking about the relationships that you have and how these concepts play a role in your day-to-day life. Think about how you're going to use this material within your self-concept paper. The next video will be on chapter 2, and it will be posted this upcoming Monday when we were supposed to have our face-to-face class. So instead, make sure that you watch that video before the quiz that takes place this upcoming week, and I will see you in the next one. So stay tuned.